You are looking at one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. An athlete who always strove for perfection and often succeeded. For 19 years, he was the ace of the Baltimore Orioles. At the La Costa Hotel and Spa in Carlsbad, California, Greatest Sports Legends host Steve Garvey met with this legend whose career had its share of success and controversy. His name, Jim Palmer. To watch Jim Palmer at work was to take a lesson in the art of pitching. Palmer was a master of location and selection. Hitters never knew what to expect. Jim Palmer, a future Hall of Famer. Jim played in 6 fall classics for the Baltimore Orioles, where he consistently mastered his opponents. When he first joined the majors, however, his pitching style was not quite as effective.
Jim, tell us about the pitching style of a Jim Palmer Oriole rookie in 1965.
Well, there's the way I've always explained pitching styles, you're either a thrower or you're a pitcher. When I came up in 1965, I was a thrower. I had as some people describe it, a blazing fastball, but I had no idea where it was going. I had a good curveball. I would come up, and on my good days when I was overpowering and I got the ball over the plate, I'd be successful. And the other times, I would just struggle. I would be wild, and I'd be all over the place. And I was mostly wild up and down. I wasn't in and out. I was one of those guys who would throw it as hard as I could and hope that it worked.
Well, that sounds like a young Koufax, but of course, in 1966, your first big year, 15 wins, and you went to the World Series against my old team, the Dodgers. And the critics, so-called critics, said that the Dodgers staff was far superior. Your thoughts about that 66 series?
Well, it was a very exciting time of my life. I'd grown up in New York, and I dreamed about being in a World Series. And you never really know what it's going to be like until you get there.
In 1966, the Baltimore Orioles reached the World Series, where they faced the Los Angeles Dodgers. In Game 1, back-to-back home runs by Frank Robinson and Brooks Robinson in the very first inning jolted the Dodgers and their ace, Don Drysdale. The Orioles rode this assault to a 5-2 victory in the opener. In Game 2, the Orioles decided to start 20-year-old Jim Palmer. Palmer would be going against Sandy Koufax, who that year won 27 games. The hard-throwing Palmer started off impressively, displaying poise that belied his youth. Throughout the game, Palmer continued to overpower the Dodgers, and by the 9th inning, the Orioles held a 6-0 lead. Jim Palmer would become the youngest pitcher ever to win a World Series game. Baltimore went on to sweep Los Angeles and capture their first championship. However, for Jim Palmer, the celebration was short-lived. His right shoulder had become so sore that doctors said he might never pitch again.
2 questions. How long did it take you to come back from that injury, and were you the same pitcher when you did come back?
Well, it took me all the way to 1969, but what happened was, in the interim, I tore a rotator cuff. Now, back then, all you had is a sore arm. Now it's a rotator cuff injury. So I never had it operated on it. I just spent 2 years where I basically really couldn't diagnose the problem that I had. I was in Miami, I was in Rochester, I was in Elmira. I made, A-ball, AA, and AAA all in 1 year, and that was in 1967. And then in 1968, I basically didn't pitch at all. So it basically about 2.5 years, and 2.5 years of really soul searching, because at 22, even though you want to continue to play, you also want to be in a situation where you also plan for your future, and it looked like my future wasn't in baseball.
Would you say that was probably the turning point in your career personally at that time?
Very much so. I mean, it taught me perseverance. For 2.5 years, I mean, I looked good running in the outfield. I couldn't throw. I couldn't do the things that I had always been able to do, so it was very frustrating. But when I came back to pitch, I almost threw as hard as I did. But what had happened in the 2.5 years was that I learned how to pitch. I had gone from the thrower that I described myself as being in 1965 to a guy that had pitched with an 80-mile-per-hour fastball after throwing in the mid-90s. I had to change speeds a little bit, so I think it really helped me. I think another thing, the most important thing, is that it put my feet on the ground. If I had gone in my second year to winning a game in the World Series and then maybe winning 20 games the next year and whatever, I don't think I would have had a true perspective of what it takes to be a pitcher.
In 1969, a healthy Jim Palmer returned to the Baltimore Orioles and their new manager, Earl Weaver. Palmer was now a complete pitcher in total command of the strike zone. He shut out 6 teams that year, including a no-hitter against the Oakland A's. By the end of the season, Palmer had won 16 games and led the Orioles to a World Series appearance against the New York Mets. In the series, the Mets played like a team of destiny as they made one amazing play after another. New York went on to defeat the Orioles in just 5 games. Despite this setback, however, it was quite a year for Jim Palmer, whose comeback assured him of a bright future. Spring training, 1970. For the Baltimore Orioles, this was a time of great expectations. A well-balanced team, Baltimore's main strength was their pitching, led by 24-year-old Jim Palmer. In 1970, Palmer led the league in innings pitched en route to his first 20-game win season. Consequently, he was named the starting pitcher for the American League in the All-Star game. There, Palmer proved to be too much to handle. By the end of the season, the Orioles had captured another pennant as Palmer won the playoff clincher for the 2nd year in a row. Now with the World Series on the horizon, Baltimore had an opportunity to fulfill their expectations of last spring.
Jim, after the loss to the Mets in '69, you came right back and won the pennant again. This time, you faced the Reds in the World Series. Can you compare the 2 teams for us?
Well, of course, in 1970, the Reds were the Big Red Machine, a great offensive ball club. And the Orioles, we'd won 108 games. It was almost a toss-up offensively. I think if you go back and compare the 2 teams, we had the better pitching. We knew that they had a great offensive ball club from the beginning of their lineup almost all the way through their lineup. And, you know, they had Lee May, they had Johnny Bench, they had Pete Rose, Bobby Tolan. They really had an Tony Perez, who was one of the outstanding all-time hitters. So we felt we could win. But again, you just don't know. I mean, you're in a possibly a 7-game World Series, and you're hoping to win. But we had seen what could happen. Again, I go back and reflect on a 20-year career. This was one of the best teams I ever played on. I mean, we had everything. We had, as I said, the great pitching. We had, Frank Robinson and Brooks Robinson, and it really turned out to be the Brooks Robinson show.
We're now on the bottom of the 6th. The 2-2 to May. Swing ground ball, third base side. Brooks Robinson's got it throwing from foul ground toward first base. It is in time.
3-1 pitch to Bench. Drilled. And swings. It's a deep right toward the corner, and it's a home run. Brooks Robinson, second World Series home run of 1970.
When the Brooks Robinson show finally ended, the Orioles had defeated the Reds 4 games to 1 and reached their quest of becoming the world champions.
After winning in '70 compared to losing in '69, I think it was one of almost thankfulness, because we knew we were the best team in '69, but we were unable to win. This year, we had kind of pointed to getting into the World Series all year, and we were able to do that. And then we won, and we won in 5 games. I think we won pretty convincingly.
This was the start of the prime of your career. What was your pitching philosophy at that time?
As my pitching evolved in the '70s, I threw more curveballs. I came up with a slider, and I came up with a changeup. But in 1970, I was basically a power pitcher. I was going to pitch well when I was able to get my fastball over when I was overpowering.
In 1971, Jim Palmer and the Orioles continued to dominate with strong pitching. With 4 of their starting pitchers winning 20 games or more, Baltimore reached the World Series, where they faced the Pittsburgh Pirates. In this series, Roberto Clemente picked up where Brooks Robinson left off. After being down 2 games to none, Clemente and the Pirates came back to take the series 4-3. The next year, Jim Palmer was again selected to start in the All-Star game, where he shut out the National League's best in all 3 innings. Palmer finished that year with a 2.07 earned run average and his 3rd straight 20-game win season. Then in 1973, Palmer won 22 more games. Baseball experts rewarded Palmer with pitching's most coveted award, the Cy Young.
I was just trying to win 20 games every year, and if I was considered for the Cy Young Award, it was great. And to win one was something very thrilling because, again, going back to one of my childhood idols, which was Sandy Koufax, I had known he had won 3, and I was going to try to, after winning my first one, try to win and win another one.
During the decade of the 70s, no pitcher won more games than Jim Palmer. Incredibly, he won 20 games or more 8 times. In 1975, he pitched 10 shutouts, won 23 games, and earned his 2nd Cy Young Award. In 1976, he became the first American League pitcher ever to win 3 Cy Young Awards. As the 70s came to a close, 34-year-old Jim Palmer helped lead Baltimore into their first World Series in 8 years. There, they faced the Pittsburgh Pirates. Although the Orioles would eventually lose the series in 7 games, Palmer performed like a champion. The 70s were a great decade for Jim Palmer, yet they were not without controversy. During his career, Palmer had been criticized by some teammates for expressing dissatisfaction with their performance. Others reasoned that Palmer was simply a perfectionist.
Jim, would you describe yourself as a perfectionist?
I don't really know if I describe myself as a perfectionist, but other people did. I guess I strive for perfection in some ways. It caused some problems, though. I mean, I think the biggest problem I ever had in my career, and one of my biggest regrets, is that I used to judge people by my own standards, and that's really unfair. And I think, of course, one of the big problems that I had is coming to the major leagues at a very early age and making mistakes. I grew up in the major leagues. I grew up in the public eye. I grew up under the scrutiny of not only the Jim Palmer fans, but the baseball fans around the country, the media. And it's not the most comfortable arena sometimes to grow up in. And I think one of the mistakes, and what I just briefly touched on, was that a lot of times that I would say things critically about my teammates, specifically the outfielders. We'd have guys that really did not live by the same standards that I did, and I would judge them thusly. It caused some problems. I had problems with Earl Weaver, who was the manager of the ball club, because he'd allow guys to go out in the outfield and mess around and not do their work before the games, and then routine fly balls would be dropping. Not only would I lose, but the team would lose. And instead of really going to him, which eventually I did, and trying to solve the problem, I would occasionally say things. And again, in retrospect, I think that I could have maybe handled those, I guess, specific situations a little bit more tactfully. But then again, I'm not perfect. Even if you strive for perfection, I think people used to say, well, there's a guy with, infinite athletic ability. Why does he say the wrong things? Why doesn't he conduct himself perfectly? And I was human.
As time went on, how would you describe that relationship with Earl Weaver?
It actually got better. I used to think that he'd come out to the mound. I mean, I did not know that he had 24 other guys to worry about. I used to think that he was going to have to solve Jim Palmer's problems right on the mound, right at that moment. And as we both mature, as we both kind of existed really over 14 or 15 years together, I solved our problems in his office. Instead of directing questions to him when he came to take me out. I'd wait till after the game or the next day, and we seemed to have a satisfactory conclusion. But the bottom line with Earl was that I respected him greatly as a winning manager. I don't think that you have to love somebody to play for him. And I mentioned this earlier. To me, the greatest thing for playing for Earl Weaver is that when you went to the ballpark, whether it was the first day of the season or the last day of the season, you knew you were going there with the same thing in mind that he had, which was to do the best you can and turn out a winner. And looking back at my career, I think that Earl pushed me. He motivated me. He gave me a lot of incentives. I may not have always agreed with him at the time, but in the long run, I think it was the best thing for Jim Palmer to have a manager like Earl Weaver.
Okay, tough question. If you had one word to describe Earl Weaver, what would it be?
Short.
Speaking of short, Earl Weaver briefly made Jim Palmer his short reliever in 1982. That year, despite injuries, Palmer still managed to win 15 games. And shortly thereafter, Palmer took advantage of his good looks by posing in, what else? Jockey shorts. Then in 1983, Palmer once again took the spotlight when the Orioles faced the Philadelphia Phillies in the World Series. In a relief appearance, Palmer shut down the Phillies to win Game 3. This victory meant a lot to Jim Palmer.
I was really thrilled to be in that World Series and to get a win. I mean, I was very happy just to contribute to the ball club. And even though I didn't do much, I did get a win. And the only pitcher in 3 decades to win a World Series game. Now, I don't know if that means you're good or you're old.
I think you're good. Jim, I get the feeling you still get that urge or itch to pitch, so I'm going to give you one more chance at me.
Not to you, though. You already embarrassed me enough in the All-Star games in 77 and 78. But if you insist.
Well, I just stuck my bat out and you hit it, so come on.
Okay, why not?
When Jim Palmer left baseball in 1984, he left behind many wonderful memories, such as the thrill of competing in 6 World Series, the often stormy relationship with manager Earl Weaver, a man whom he grew to admire and respect, the excitement of facing the legendary Sandy Koufax as a 20-year-old. Indeed, after 19 years, Jim Palmer left the game he loved.
Do you have a fondest memory in baseball?
Fondest memory in baseball, I think it goes back to 1965. I came in on a Labor Day doubleheader, second game of a doubleheader with the bases loaded, and I was 19 at the time, and I was playing for a guy named Hank Bauer, who was a former Yankee who loved to beat the Yankees, and I come in and with the bases loaded, trailing 2-0, and 3 batters that I face with the bases loaded are Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, and Elston Howard.
Pretty good trio.
I throw them about 10 or 11 high fastballs. They all strike out, and we go on to win the ball game. Andy Etchebarren hits a 3-run inside the park home run, which is kind of a novelty, especially for somebody with Andy's lack of speed.
Yeah.
And Blefary hits a 2-run home run to put us up. And I pitched like 6 innings, struck out 10 guys, and didn't give up any hits. And it really transcended pitching in the World Series or no-hitters or any of those things, because it was just something was very spontaneous. It's just something that happened. I was sitting 1 minute in the bullpen, the next minute I'm out on the mound.
Yeah.
And to do that at 19, it's just something amazing.
I know after the 78 All-Star game, and I got a hit off you, you've wanted to get another chance at me.
We call it revenge.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
All right, so am I. Putting a lot on the line.
I know I'm over the hill.
Go get him, kid.